On the 2nd of July, 2026, India and Japan held their 16th annual summit in New Delhi. What emerged was not a routine diplomatic meeting. It was a $42 billion commitment covering artificial intelligence, semiconductors, defense hardware, critical minerals, and the world's most advanced railway technology. China's foreign ministry issued a public statement the very next day, warning the partnership should not target any third party. This is the full story of how a 70-year friendship became the most important strategic alliance in Asia.
India and Japan established diplomatic relations in 1952, just 7 years after Japan was destroyed by 2 nuclear bombs, and India gained independence from British colonial rule. Both countries were starting from almost nothing. Both were determined to build something lasting. For decades, the relationship was warm, but not strategically deep. India was non-aligned. Japan was firmly in the American security umbrella. That began to change in the year 2000, when both countries upgraded their ties to a global partnership, recognizing economic complementarity and regional shared interests. In 2006, the relationship became a strategic and global partnership as both countries deepened security and regional cooperation. But the real transformation came in 2014.
In 2014, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe elevated the relationship to a special strategic and global partnership. This was not just a title change, it was a fundamental reorientation. Abe saw in Modi a leader who shared Japan's concerns about a rising China and a potentially retreating America. Modi saw in Japan a technological and financial partner that could help India industrialize, modernize, and become a serious regional power. The two leaders met more than a dozen times over the following years, an extraordinary frequency that reflected genuine personal alignment and shared strategic vision. Abe's assassination in 2022 was mourned in India as a national loss. Modi attended the state funeral personally. That speaks to how deep the bond had become.
The 16th India-Japan Annual Summit, held in New Delhi on July 2, 2026, was the most consequential in the partnership's history. Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi, on her first official visit to India since assuming office, arrived with a high-level delegation, including senior officials, CEOs, and industry leaders. The joint statement was titled, "Advancing a Partnership of Strategic Convergence and Trust for Shared Growth, Prosperity, and Resilience." 3 major signed declarations covered defense and security, economic security cooperation, and artificial intelligence. Nearly 1,400 Japanese companies already operate in India across manufacturing, automobiles, electronics, logistics, and financial services. The summit built on this foundation to create something far more ambitious.
The most strategically significant outcome of the summit was the Unicorn Defense Project. This is the first major India-Japan defense co-development program, a historic milestone in a relationship that previously focused on exercises and equipment purchases rather than joint development. Unicorn involves cooperation on integrated naval communications and sensing systems, the kind of technology that allows a warship to see, hear, and communicate across a contested theater of operations. The significance of joint development is not just technological. It means both countries are now sharing classified defense knowledge with each other. That level of trust is reserved for the closest strategic partners. India and Japan have reached that threshold. Japan pledged approximately $42 billion in investment and financing commitment to India across the coming years. The India-Japan Joint Declaration on Economic Security Cooperation covered 5 strategic sectors: semiconductors, critical minerals, information and communication technology, clean energy, and pharmaceuticals. On artificial intelligence,
India and Japan signed a joint statement combining Japan's precision hardware engineering with India's enterprise software capabilities. PM Modi described the technological partnership between India and Japan as the strongest pillar of bilateral ties. Both countries also committed to using local currencies in bilateral commerce, a step toward reducing dependence on the US dollar in trade settlement. Nearly every sector that defines the next decade of global competition is now covered by an India-Japan framework.
Japan's most visible and most enduring bet on India's future is the Mumbai-Ahmedabad bullet train project. This is India's first high-speed rail corridor, 508 kilometers of track using Japanese Shinkansen technology, the same system that made Japan's trains famous across the world. The project cost is approximately 1.08 lakh crore rupees. Japan is funding a major portion through long-term JICA loans, including a 400 billion yen tranche signed in late 2023. Japan has also donated 2 Shinkansen train sets, the E5 and E3 series, for testing and systems familiarization in India. At the July 2026 summit, Japan reaffirmed cooperation for commercial operation on priority sections by 2027. When the first bullet train runs between Mumbai and Ahmedabad, it will carry Japanese technology, Japanese financing, and 7 decades of Japan-India trust.
Japan's strategic pivot toward India did not happen by accident. It is the result of a deliberate calculation about China. Japan calls this the China Plus One strategy, the effort to diversify manufacturing and supply chains away from China to reduce dangerous concentration risk. After COVID exposed how dependent the world had become on Chinese manufacturing, Japanese companies accelerated this pivot dramatically. India won this competition because of scale, democratic stability, a large domestic market, a growing industrial policy under Make in India, and, critically, shared values. Japan and India are both democracies. Both operate under the rule of law. Both believe in freedom of navigation in the Indo-Pacific. These are not abstract principles. They are the foundation of strategic trust. And strategic trust is why Japan is willing to share its most sensitive defense and technology capabilities with India, rather than with any other alternative. India and Japan are 2 of the 4 members of the Quad, alongside the United States and Australia. The Quad is the Indo-Pacific's most important security coalition, built specifically to ensure that the ocean connecting India to Japan, Australia, and the Americas remains free and open, rather than dominated by any single power. At the July 2026 summit, India and Japan specifically discussed maritime security in the East China Sea and South China Sea. Both countries have participated in joint naval exercises, JMEX with Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Force alongside the Indian Navy. Japan also participated in India's International Fleet Review 2026 at Visakhapatnam, a public display of maritime solidarity. India and Japan are not just Quad members on paper, they are the strategic anchor of the coalition. China's reaction to the July 2026 India-Japan summit was immediate and revealing. Beijing's foreign ministry stated publicly that India-Japan cooperation should not target any third party and should support regional stability rather than exclusive groupings. The phrase exclusive groupings is diplomatic language for the Quad, China's way of signaling that it views India-Japan deepening ties as part of a coordinated containment strategy. China also linked its response to broader tensions around Taiwan and the Indo-Pacific. The fact that China felt compelled to respond within 24 hours of the summit tells you everything you need to know about how seriously Beijing takes the India-Japan alliance. When China is worried, that is the signal that something genuinely consequential just happened. India's deepening alliance with Japan does not mean India has abandoned its strategic autonomy.
India is simultaneously the chair of BRICS, a bloc that includes China and Russia. India buys Russian oil. India buys Russian defense equipment. India maintains diplomatic channels with every major power. But India's strategic autonomy has never meant neutrality. It has meant the freedom to act in India's own interest. And India's interest is increasingly clear: a free, open, and stable Indo-Pacific where no single power dominates. Japan shares that interest exactly. That is why this partnership keeps deepening, regardless of which government is in power in either country. The India-Japan alliance is not about any one leader. It is structural, strategic, and durable. In 1952, India and Japan were two broken post-war nations trying to rebuild from nothing. India had just escaped 2 centuries of colonial rule. Japan had just emerged from military defeat and occupation. Both chose democracy. Both chose development. Both chose a rules-based international order. 74 years later, they are the 2 largest democracies in Asia, and they are building an alliance that covers everything from bullet trains to defense satellites to artificial intelligence. The $42 billion commitment announced at the July 2026 summit is not just money. It is Japan telling India, we trust your future enough to stake our own strategic position on it. And India telling Japan, we will build that future with you, rather than with anyone who wants to dominate rather than partner. In a world increasingly divided between powers that impose and powers that cooperate, India and Japan have chosen to cooperate. That choice is reshaping Asia, and it has only just begun.